Welcome, everyone. It is with a very warm welcome that today we are going to interview Elisabet Sahtouris. She's a Ph.D. and evolution biologist, an author and consultant on living systems. And she taught at M.I.T, at the University of Massachusetts. She's the kind of people I love. She has a huge heart. She's very, very conscious, very smart. She's trying to reuniting spirituality and science. And you can really feel like she's a soul having a human experience. My favorite people. Welcome, Elisabet.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha from Hawaii.
Do you want to, what I really would like to start with is just make a review at your specialty, the evolutionary record from the original bacteria and their Darwinian fight and competition up to the stage of maturity where they are going to cooperate with each other. But what I would like to know is what are the scientific assumptions, the basic assumption that we learn that story, and what other assumption we could have for science and for the universe. I think that's your field.
Yes, I became an evolution biologist really in order to be a good futurist. Because if you don't know where you've come from, what your trajectory has been, it's hard to figure out what can you do perhaps differently in the future, or do you want to do the same thing in the future? So for me, evolution biology, which is the life story of the Earth in a sense, it is about the 4 billion years in which Earth has come to life and has created all these wonderful other beings and eventually humans. And for me, as you mentioned, it is about this transition from a competitive youthful phase into a mature cooperative phase. I was taught, because I'm now 86 years old, so when I went to school, everything was taught in the Darwinian mode only. And pretty much today it is still true. And what I call Western science, because we will talk later about the other sciences, Western science has these certain assumptions about what kind of a universe we live in and how it operates. And so it was the Darwinian story was very strong, and there was no alternative to it. And it made this assumption somehow that competition is the name of the game, that everything in the whole biological world evolves only through competitive interactions among individuals. And now we know that there are that individuals quite quickly form communities, and that actually the communities begin being selected for their internal cohesion, meaning their internal cooperation. And we will talk about how the different size levels of community evolve over time as we go. So I had to look at this Darwinian mode and reconsider it, especially in light of quantum science, which Western science has not yet come to terms with, in the sense that it keeps the standard model of physics based on Newtonian to Einsteinian physics separate from the quantum models of how the universe works, because it really doesn't know how to integrate them. I have come to use this keyboard metaphor for the whole universe or cosmos, as well as for ourselves. Anything within the universe, any living entity, is composed of matter, energy, and spirit. Why? Because what the quantum theorists came to, and what everyone, even the Einsteinian world believes in is that the universe is actually made of vibrations. It's the one thing they kind of agree on, and so do the other sciences in the world that we'll talk about. So if you think of vibrations as being the nature of the universe, then you can arrange vibrations into something like a piano keyboard, yes? So we have a feeling about the keyboard. We don't think about ethereal music in the low keys, do we? Ether, ethereal, we think of as being in the high keys. And the low keys, they throb, they feel alive, they feel physical. You feel them in your bones, in your body, yes? So it is natural for us to understand a musical keyboard as being from this low throbbing material up into the ethereal, right? The spirit.
Sure.
So actually, in my worldview, I have come to believe, like the Eastern sciences do, that the universe itself, this sea of vibrations, is a sea of cosmic consciousness. Consciousness is what the quantum theorists broke through into. They broke through matter. They studied matter because Western science starts at the matter end of the keyboard. It assumes, its number one assumption is that the universe is made of material objects. And it has decreed that to be real, to be part of reality, it must be measurable. Measurable how? With physical instruments. So when they first learned about energy, electromagnetic energy, it was considered a woo-woo stage show kind of thing where hypnotists used it and they didn't quite consider it real until they began to measure certain aspects of energy and it came into the scientific worldview. So now, what do you do with the rest of the keyboard? Western science has no access to it because it is unable to measure non-material, non-electromagnetic energy vibrations. The quantum theorists had no way then to explain what happened when they broke into through matter, right down through the molecules, through the atoms, through the subatomic particles into this strange thing or entity or what. They didn't know what it was. And so the tree behind me is the matter energy spirit being, as am I. And therefore we can do things like commune rather than communicate with language. We can lock our spirit consciousness together. And when we merge it, we can actually exchange information. And
Right.
science is now measuring that a tree actually has not only our five senses have been measured in trees, as well as at least 12 more that we can detect with our instruments that trees have that humans do not have, which they can detect all kinds of radiation and light levels and things in ways we can't. Now, why it's hard for us to understand that a tree could see, for example, is that it has no eyes, right?
A unicellular cells can avoid obstacles. They don't have eyes, but they have what they think inside the centrosome, the diplosome inside the cell that receives
Yes.
and can. So you don't need necessarily an eye, like a developed eye like us. If you have some organelles inside the cells that can receive light and process light, you get a pretty good idea of, chromophore.
Exactly.
This.
Let's go back
Yes.
almost 4 billion years. To make it really simple, if you divide evolution as 4 billion years, into two, half of evolution occurred before there were cells with those mitochondria, before there were the kinds of cells that we are made of even. It was only about what we would nowadays call bacterial cells. The primeval cells of Earth were like ancient archaebacteria, I like to call them. They are technically archaea, and but they are bacterial-like enough so that, and their lineage goes up to modern bacteria. So I call them archabacs, archibacteria.
Yes.
And they had the world to themselves for 2 billion years, and during which they did a lot of competitive things and a lot of unbelievably creative, inventive things through that competition. You know, warfare often generates many new inventions. Competition is a creative force, in a sense. So the ancient bacteria went through a long phase in which they did compete for resources with each other. And in the course of their evolution, they caused 2 major global crises that no beings until now have ever caused in between this time. And the first one of those was a global hunger crisis. And they literally caused this crisis by eating up all the free food, all the minerals and things that were available to these ancient bacterial entities that had somehow organized themselves at a molecular level into loops and finally putting cell walls around themselves to become actual beings as bacteria. And so they then had there were free sugars and acids lying around on the early Earth crust, and they ate them all up literally and caused this hunger crisis. And what do you do now? Well, somehow some of them figured out a way to make food by creating new chemical loops and inventing that process, that ability to make food out of other things. Some of the bacteria went underground in hiding from them because the new ones created oxygen. They used carbon dioxide and made oxygen. The carbon dioxide had been made by the original cells. But they also, some of the smaller ones it began to get so mobile. They invented they actually invented the earliest motor known to biology. It's called the molecular motor, and it is more efficient than our motors, another incredible invention of ancient bacteria. And our scientists now are desperately trying to copy these motors, right? And they can't do it. They can't build them. Why? They don't, because they can't play the whole keyboard is my answer, but they don't understand nature fully. So photosynthesis was evolved, and then also the bacteria that were using the carbon dioxide and emitting the oxygen, the oxygen creators were creating a toxic gas. And so that's why some of them went underground to protect themselves from it, and others developed sun shields kind of to avoid it. And eventually it worked itself out. And to make this very long and incredibly interesting story, because first they created hunger and solved the problem, then the solving that problem created the toxic global pollution of oxygen, right? And they had to figure out how to make use of that toxic gas. And that's where the mitochondria come in, because they can then transform that into energy.
Right.
And
Klebsiella, something like that. They were called. They were bacteria called the Klebsiella that we have ingested, right? So they were bacteria that we are symbiotic with, right? They have their own DNA and genetic material, and we ingested them. Yeah. They were bacteria, right? That were there to be able to process oxygen. Yeah, exactly.
So eventually these ancient ancestors of ours, because they do become our ancestors, or they have to be, they were the only thing around, they were able to solve global hunger and global pollution problems. Isn't that incredible? I mean, these are the two things that humans are now facing. And I say no creature ever in between the two, which is why I'm very fond of them. And of course, our guts are full of bacteria that are running our immune systems and digesting our food and repairing our gut level walls. We ourselves are creatures. How is it that we have bacteria in us? Because there's never been any creature larger than a bacterium that has not been an association of the great nucleated cell that these bacteria came to create as their first big cooperative.
Yeah.
And so that what happened was originally the high-tech little breathers, as I call them, invaded the big sluggish bubblers, which were only fermenting bacteria like the original ones, and ate them from the inside, destroyed them. But eventually it was worked out that if they didn't destroy them, they could actually use their electric motors to drive this big bubbler into water that had more light in it, and then they could take in some of the chloroplast bacteria and make food for this colony, this evolving colony. You
Right.
see, so eventually we end up with two kinds of cells on the Earth, the bacterial cell and the nucleated giant cell. And that's the one. Now it's new. Now the bacteria have moved from this competitive phase into a cooperative phase. However, this new invention, the big nucleated cell, is new on the planet. It's young. It's got to go through its own youthful phase of competition.
But I heard somewhere it was about 20% competition and 80% cooperation in terms of time, or it's not correct? You couldn't say that.
We put these strange numbers on things. Yeah. When exactly was that? Hard. I mean, we have to figure all these things out.
Yeah, just to get an idea for us, how long, I mean, how long before.
Yeah. And Western science is amazing in its inventiveness, in its ability to track fossil records, to go back to figure out how these things worked back then, how the material world worked. That's what Western science has been brilliant at. So anyway, we now have a world in which there are coexisting bacteria and giant bacterial cooperatives we call nucleated cells. And after another billion years, those nucleated cells, having gone through the similar kinds of processes, invent the multi-celled creature. That's the two big leaps in evolution, from the bacteria to the nucleated cell, from the nucleated cell to the multi-celled creature. Then you learned in school the rest of it, right? What happens then when but always the multi-celled creatures had associations with the bacterial creatures. Yeah. And always we have, yes?
No, I just remember single cell about 3.4 million years ago, multicellular 1.5.
So we go from 2 billion years ago for the nucleated cell and 1 billion years ago for the multi-celled creature.
So one question I'm really interested, because I think it is something that really helps evolution most of the time. It's really something from the actuality. Virus. We know that we have 10 times more virus and bacteria. They have an enormous, place. That without the virus, we would not have placenta. This is called what we call the syncytial trophoblasts, funky cells with a lot of nucleus. And without placenta, there's no humans. We couldn't, evolve. And I'm sure they have a very important supporting role for evolution, but we don't know so much about virus. But it's a fabulous organism, and we don't know where they come from. There's some, theory came before the bacteria, without being, and then they lost their ability to multiply on their own. They needed a host. Some people say, well, they need a host, so they have to come after the bacteria. We don't know what happened, but in that, do you have any sense in that whole story what the virus are, what their place is?
I actually believe that bacteria came before viruses.
Okay.
I actually believe that viruses were an invention of bacteria, a storage capsule for information. Now, every one of our cells in our bodies lives in a fluid environment. Yes, it's as though they are islands in a river, but the islands are very close to each other. But the cell has to have somewhere to put its waste and also to put communication signals that are intended for other cells. And 24/7, we are spitting out what we call scientifically exosomes, meaning outer bodies, things that the cell spits out into these rivers of plasma, and they are traveling around in these rivers. And we call them exosomes. And when we look at them under our most powerful microscopes, we see that they look like viruses, like the viruses we identified by investigating fluids given off during disease and things like that, right?
Yes.
So some of these exosomes actually look like coronaviruses, yep. and some of them are waste, as I say, and some of them are signals for other cells. Now, the way those other signals get into the cells they're intended for is that they have a kind of address. On the virus has a protein coat, right, which we know because that's how they altered the coronavirus. And that has an address on it that it doesn't drill its way into the cell. It knocks on the door and the cell either opens to it or not. It either allows that virus-like particle in or not. And so the address is very important. The spike protein, so to speak, is very important because that is what lets it in or not. And you know about gain of function research. We don't need to get into. So
you believe that basically, yeah, you believe the virus are basically exosome because they have the same size, they have the same type of structure, and
that's the origin, I believe. So there had to be a cell before there could be such an exosome, right? Whether bacteria, I forget now. I think bacteria can emit some particles. But we know more about it in the nucleated cell.
Yeah,
and we.
You know, I think they say there's millions of viruses. I think they only identified 9,000 only, and so you can imagine they are in water, viruses are in air or exosome. They are, so you can imagine this enormous amount of information communicated through us all the time. And most of them, I believe, in my experience, they have pretty good supporting information for our evolution. Some we know are a bit more difficult, but most of them are not pathogens. They are not infectious. They are not creating disease. So you can imagine that information, and the first internet of virus communicating through us all the time.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's a high quality frequency consciousness. And they play probably a big role in evolution. And I know that when I have a cold, sometimes it just helps me grow and evolve. And if I resist, I get really sick. If I don't, I let it help me transform somehow on a small scale. So
yes, and viruses are important. They're packages of information, aren't they? And this incredible amount of communion that goes on, or communication. If there's an actual transfer of these exosomes around the body, I would call that communication. When the information is transmitted through the higher end of the keyboard, the non-material end, then I call it communion.
Yes.
And this is what I can do with the tree, or with
yes.
There's a lovely, lovely book called Kinship with All Life, which I have given to many, many young people, because it is about a man in Hollywood who was known as the St. Francis of Hollywood for his love of animals, who had to take care of the first movie star dog in Hollywood, whose name was Strongheart, for 6 weeks. And the dog was so intelligent that the man decided to become his humble pupil and follow him around doing everything on the dog's schedule. And long story short, the dog teaches him communion.
Wow.
And he ends up being able to transmit information back and forth. And he writes in this lovely way, as a kind of a Victorian gentleman. And he said, we had hours of conversation every day, not as man and dog talking to each other, but as the universe talking us to each other.
Your assumption is basically consciousness is primordial. Virus, bacteria, in the living universe, the consciousness is there. That's why we can communicate using the same medium. We're
made of it. We're literally made of that consciousness. We are part of that consciousness.
And even though we talk about science being, very the positivism, very limiting. I'm going to interview a few scientists that talk about consciousness being non-biological. So, the main idea is the brain, the synapse, the neuron create consciousness, but there's another also hypothesis that the consciousness is transmitted through the brain. So the brain receives consciousness, and that's scientific. I mean, that's a field of science. And so we are getting there, that, consciousness is something pervading us and circulating, which is amazing that they're already there, talking about a non-biological, consciousness as leading neuroscientist.
It's so interesting to me that you call it non-biological consciousness.
Yeah,
because of that depends on how do we define biology.
Yes.
And you see, think of the keyboard. The Western science is starting at the matter end, and the Eastern science is starting at the consciousness end. And so the Easterners would say consciousness creates the brain. And the Western science says, no, the brain creates consciousness. Yes. You can come to absolutely opposite assumptions about the universe, depending on which end of the vibrational frequency spectrum you are talking from.
Because I heard you talk about it, the first scientists in Western, I mean, even before, we think maybe they come from Persia, but the first were the Greek Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes.
Oh, I love Anaximander.
I know, me too. They talk about apeiron, consciousness. They talk about arche, the source of things. Thales thought about water, but they talk about something infinite at the origin of things. That's the beginning of science. When science really took a turn, is this date I remember, 1620. Francis Bacon. We sail the boat of reason, rationality, and we forget all the other part of the keyboard on the top, the spirit. We don't know what there, we cut it. And that's Francis Bacon, 1620. Then we had Descartes, 1637. And then you got Newton, 1687, something like that. So we have that from the 1620, really, we take that turn to not pay. They'd say we don't know what's there, so we're not going to investigate. Normally, we should have accepted it is there and use other medium than science. But slowly, we just cut the keyboard and we only have physicalism. And that's 1620. Even though it didn't start like that really in Greece. But it's, But tell me about Anaximander. What do you like? It's so much.
And actually, by the way, Francis Bacon is much misquoted through history for a long string of things, from a quote that he talked about nature. He actually said nature to be commanded must be obeyed. And he is misquoted as that we have to hound and torture her secrets from nature, witch trial talk. Anyway.
Yeah, those people were actually scientists theist. They will still believe in God and they still have, but they will not explore it with scientific medium. But they, Newton, talk about the Bible a lot, what the date of the coming back of Jesus Christ. And it was there, Swedenborg, totally theist also. And little by little, we get more and more atheists, basically. That's a lot of scientists are atheists today because of the sad story of evolution, randomness, in evolution and empty, and as you know, an empty universe, totally random and empty, but it didn't start like that. And we just little by little took that turn. So you say you want to take, I know also the oldest school of thought was Sumeria, Sumerians, Sumer, and then you have the Chinese and the Indian, and they all start with consciousness. But today we'd like to reunite and, this whole keyboard.
Yes. Bruno, let me go back for a moment to your mentioning Anaximander. The reason he's my favorite Greek scientist is because we have only one statement quoted from him anymore that his students remembered over time. The rest was lost. And that one statement, I actually translated it from the ancient Greek as, everything that forms in nature incurs a debt which it must repay by dissolving so that other things can form. That is a theory of recycling in one statement.
And you know what?
Isn't it wonderful?
I love
Everything
it. I
that
know this
forms in
quote because,
nature.
yeah, this is a main quote. This is for me, when I heard this quote, I immediately thought about black hole. And I thought about us as a torus and the black hole that recycling things and energy all the time too. And I'm like, wow, what a connection between, you know, the biggest picture, the black hole, the center of the cosmos, and, you know, us.
And did you recognize in your torus that on one, the torus, for those who don't know, we're talking TORUS, the donut shape. That is in geometry, the only form that can maintain itself in space. It rotates two ways. It rotates inside out, and it can rotate. And I call that the smoke ring theory of the universe that was developed just before Einstein in England. They literally blew smoke rings and talked about that shape as being so unique. But did you notice that what goes into one side is coming out at the other side? And this is like the keyboard. Which direction are you looking at? Are you looking at the gravitational force that goes inward, or are you looking at the
expansion?
What is the other one? We have gravitation, and what do we call the outward force? The expansion.
Expansion, yeah.
Right. The expansive force is the electromagnetic energy can go outward and it can pull inward. So that is how the recycling works. And you can trace one line from the top of the spiral inward out and then back around all the way. You can make this kind of infinity loop around. Now, think of your body. You are technically, in a geometric sense, a torus, because a torus is defined as one solid object with one hole through it, all the way through it. And so a teacup can be a torus because you can mold the clay. It's still a single object and it has only one hole through it. Now, make a human body. You can stick the arms out and the legs out. Where does this hole end up? At the other end of you. Yes? So technically, we are toroidal beings.
Right. And they even said
and that makes it interesting to think about our gut bacteria, because the bacteria are simply coating our outsides, which become our insides when you go through the hole.
Technically,
isn't that fun?
Even outside, technically the hole in the torus is outside. And it is, and we say, I was saying in embryology, they think really the endoderm is the first tissue. So the endoderm that's going to create the digestive tube, they think is the first, the hypoblast is the first.
The what?
The endoderm, the
oh, yes.
tissue. And they think it's one of the first tissues to exist.
It folds in.
And actually, when you think about the central nervous system, we have the epineuron on the back, and some are hyponeuron. Sometimes the nervous system is in the back of this tube, sometimes in the front, but this tube is always there in the center. So it's like really primordial. We are really this black hole that connected with a black hole.
And so theoretically, our gut bacteria can walk around our whole skins and go back in at the other end. I mean, you see, that's what's so interesting about this toroidal idea. And I got it from Nassim Haramein. You may have run into his work that started that way. And
toroidal is everywhere in nature. And now they we try to work on that. They are very supporting us, and they say now they can change our emotion, and it's such an organization. They try to I remember to experiment on cat and get rid of all their bacteria. They couldn't live without their microbiota. They wouldn't live. You need some microbiota to be able to survive. It's amazing.
We have 10 times as many bacterial cells as we have giant nucleated cells, right? And yes, we are a colony of these nucleated cells and bacteria that have, there is no way, you know, when they try to make sterile mice in the laboratory and things like that, it's very hard to keep them alive because they're trying to make them bacteria free. And the living entity can't function without its bacteria. We have to learn to love them. I actually wrote a little book for iPhones at 40 cartoons called Bacteria Are Us, like the toys are us with the backward R. And it's just a little, it's available online. It's called Bacteria Are Us. And it's to explain how these bacterial ancestors created us and still are with us, keeping us healthy. So what we really have to do now, though, of course, is move from that youthful competitive phase into the mature cooperative phase. Like every young person, we expect them to be feisty and competitive. We invented sports to make a competition that was intended by the Greeks to drive excellence, not to kill each other, right? Because by pitting two teams against each other, you drive excellence. You increase the performance on both sides. And I used to say, you know, what if you went to a school and before the ball game with the neighboring school, you had said nothing to the coach or the players, but you talked to the audience and you say to the parents in the audience, tonight we're going to cheer excellence. And I learned this from a Chinese basketball game that I attended in China, where they actually did this with a real basketball game. Wow. My host stood up and cheered the first basket. The next one was made by the other team, and he equally enthusiastically got up and cheered again. And I said, which team is yours? And he said, what do you mean? I don't have a team. I said, well, which one do you want to win? He said, how do I know which one will be best tonight? And so I thought about it. If you said this to the parents before the game, we're going to cheer excellence. And at the end of the game, in other words, you will cheer every point made by both teams. And at the end of the game, the team that made the most points will give a party for the other team for driving them to the extra excellence, a thank you.
Perfect. Yeah.
Imagine. Yeah. This is how we have to understand competition. Healthy competition for driving excellence, not hostile competition. We are at the end of about 6,000 years of an empire-building mode in our human evolution, during which many cooperative indigenous peoples struggled for their lives and relatively few survived. And we can still look back to them to teach us how to do real by the people, for the people rule, whether you call it a democracy or something else. 24/7, my cells meet their self-interest through negotiations with what's coming down the rivers and the other cells in the whole body. And there's always a negotiation 24/7 between the self-interest of the molecule, of the cell, of the organ system, of the whole body, because they all recognize themselves as part of a communing whole in which if every level is not healthy, the whole thing will fall apart. So you have to not turn the self-interest into selfishness, because when you do, you get cancer, right? The cells stop negotiating with the others and only interested in proliferating themselves.
But Elisabet, how much competition is there in our cells, in our body? I mean, we don't have too many examples for harmonious body. How much competition there is between cells? I don't think the cell of my heart. I mean, actually, the brain is trying to get more food than they get the food before the rest, and we try to save. But usually there's not much competition. Is
there a striving to be better? That's a very interesting question, because that's in a healthy system, a truly cooperative system. And look at humans. We live by the millions in cities cooperating all day long, and no one even notices because we've been taught that we are competitive. And it's crazy. Tamsin Woolley Barker, figured out there are only 6 truly social species have evolved in all of evolution.
Which one?
The 4 insect ones that we know, and 2 others. blind mole rats that live by the millions in underground cities. So we don't even know about them until science dug them up and studied how incredibly complex their societies are.
Or
and
ants?
us.
Ants, all the ants?
I said the four insect with the bees, the ants, the wasps, and the termites, right?
Right.
But after that, only 2 mammalian species are truly social, meaning living by the millions, in very large societies. Many animals have smaller cooperatives, but only humans at the visible size level, right, beyond insects. Humans and blind mole rats are the only truly social in that sense of millions cooperating together, and we do it. However, our economy is still very rapacious because we don't obey the recycling rule, the Anaximander rule, right? Anaximandros. So what we have to do is develop a wise society, which I call an ecosophy, because the word ecology and economy both come from the Greek word ekos, which means household. And they recognized household at holarchic levels, from the family to the community, to the nation, to the universe of gods, right, in the sky, all affecting each other up and down the holarchy or in and out of it. And the word chaos in Greek, chaos, means the fullness of potential from this underlying consciousness sea is the potential for all the creation, right? And so cosmos is the ordered, patterned universe that came out of the chaos, the potential materializing gives you the cosmos. So from chaos to which I had as a byline on my first Gaia book, is legitimate way to look at things, right? How out of the potential of the cosmic consciousness are we co-creators here, and why are we here? So ecology means ecos plus logos. Logos is the organization of the household. So the ecology is nature as an organized household. The economy is the household with nomos, law, rule. It's how it's governed. Why did we separate the organization from its rule? It's modus operandi, if you like. That was a mistake. Now, what we did was we made our economy superior to the ecology. We saw ecology, nature, as a set of resources to suck up into our human economy because we were superior. And if you turn that exactly upside down and fit our economy into nature, acknowledging nature bigger, wiser, more experienced than humans, take nature as the guide and fit our economy into it without harming nature, then we have the ecos with sophos, Sophia, wisdom, the wise society, the ecosophy.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for all that.
I do think that humanity is a big investment of the cosmos in physical worlds. And I asked a friend of mine who lives multidimensionally, and there are many such people around, especially children coming in. So if you don't tell them you cannot see fairies in the garden and you cannot talk to the dog and right, these things, if we don't beat it out of them, they are naturally whole keyboard players, and there are more and more of them. But we have to move out of this empire building mode and respect nature again, and respect each other, and form communities in which what we learned through COVID, when we elevated carers and people who were caretakers to heroic status for the first time, and that this is what we're moving into, caring and sharing, self-sufficient as much as possible, like cells. Each is self-sufficient, but yet dependent on all its other cells for its existence and on its organs, on its whole body. So it's enough I think I have said.
Yeah, thank you, Elisabet, so much. We really appreciate it. It's such an honor to have you, hopefully, for many more years, helping us to shift to more cooperation and understanding the bigger picture here. Yeah, and you do it with all your with brilliant brain and your heart. And that's also something beautiful to hear. Thank you so much. Oh, you want me to, maybe I could mention this beautiful, here we go. This is your book, Gaia's Dance, and your website is right there. Perfect.
Yes, this is the shorter, more updated version of my Earth Dance Living Systems and Evolution. For those who want more information, it's still very timely, even though it's 25 years old or something. And I have a website. It's a bit out of date, but there's a lot of free stuff on it.
Perfect. Blessing, Elisabet. Lots of
Thank
good
you
things for all your conference. Thank you for this time with us.